In conclusion, this is all by way of saying that I went to Charlotte's room that night, not only to confess, but to be forgiven. I may even have nursed a hope of scoring points for honesty and for being desirable to other women, which would prove that I was with her out of choice rather than necessity. But at the very least, I would be forgiven. That was how it worked. In books, on stage and screen, in my mother's kitchen, in the walnut pews of St. Brendan's. I had never not been forgiven after confessing, until this night.
Song where he just yells, "Maestro!" I've never been called a maestro. Toby, if I can say Toby. Patrick, if I can say Patrick. Please, I'm going to start. I don't know if you guys have ever been to family therapy before, but first of all, just really quickly, as Patrick finds a seat, it is great to be here. New Bohemia is alive and well here in San Francisco. This is who we are. This is what we do. The Arion Press is a fantastic place. Ted was slightly remiss by saying that you don't have to just subscribe. You can buy books for different occasions. Christmas is always coming, even in July. And if you can support this, I know you have supported the Arion Press, but please do all you can to support such a unique, unbelievable institution. It really is singular to San Francisco, maybe the nation. We were thinking maybe Japan has something like this, but we're not going to give it up to Japan right now. I'm going to call myself the third wolf.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you very much. No, it's like totally insinuating myself right here. But at the same time, I think generationally and otherwise, I'm a writer and a huge jazz fan, and not as good as either one of the gentlemen to my left or right in any of it. But I've certainly read, I'm not going to say all your short stories, but I've read pretty much everything you've ever written. And like Tom said, I think everybody in my generation and other people's generations have. And they've been influenced by it and inspired. And I'm going to say, I've heard you play with Martin Shelby. I've heard you play at Stanford. I've heard you play at SF Jazz. I've heard him play in my living room. He actually was trying to teach my children. As a writer, I got 4 science kids, so we'll jump into that in just a second, because this is what I want to know. Patrick also has played in my living room, and whenever the sounds got good, I would pause, and I'd be like, that is not my fucking kid. Like, you know, the intellectualism and the sound coming from this cat right here, I mean, he's got a lot to say, and he's saying it, and I hope we everybody comes out and sees Patrick as well. As buys Tobias' new book when it comes out, but deep cats here. This is nice.
Patrick is going to be presenting music with his group at SF Jazz in 5 days, September 18th.
It'll be nice. These two gentlemen, I wanted to acknowledge them too. This is Hans Glauischnig on the bass. And this is one of my actually one of the reasons I moved to California, no offense, Mom and Dad. But I was living in New York and getting a little frustrated with it, and there's a real, the sort of chauvinism in New York about other musical scenes, and I came out to California for a month to try some gigs and dry out a little bit, and and I did some gigs with Hamir, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll live here then. Of course, now he lives in New York, but this is Hamir Atwal. Really glad to have him here.
Well, so maybe before we dive into fathers and sons, because that's what I'm most interested in, we only have about 20 minutes, that's kind of an interesting starter question, because so much of the media and stuff and the publishing industry lives in New York, maybe in LA, depending on what you're doing, and vice versa with jazz. The Great Pacific Northwest, having written a novel called Blue Notes, I definitely, know that stretch of the woods is not necessarily embraced by the publishing industry, nor is, the West Coast sound. And West Coast, like, we got 30 million motherfuckers here, right? So, like, are you talking, who are you talking about? When, right? And is it LA? And both of you have departed and created your own sounds. You have your own voices, so to speak. So just a quick, maybe, Patrick, how has that been embraced or not embraced in New York? And then same question in terms of, like, maybe trials and tribulations of having a voice that doesn't come from, say, a media center.
Well, we're lucky in the world of music that there is the artifact, there's the record, which often is the most permanent thing, and hopefully a couple of reviews around the record which circulate and that sort of thing. But really what we do is much more in the moment and with people. The 99.9% of the music I've ever made there's no record of it whatsoever. And the truth is that the recordings, this goes back to the 1920s when the recording industry was growing in Chicago and Los Angeles and New York. The sort of history of music gives this huge bias to the places where the recordings are made and where the critics pay attention. And once you're a jazz musician, both of these guys travel all around the world, and I'm sure they can attest to this as well. Once you're actually playing and going to different places, you realize that anywhere that there's 20 great musicians and 40 great people to listen to them, you can end up playing some of the best music that's ever been played. And so I really kind of tried not to worry too much about much beyond that. I'm lucky that I enjoy doing this so completely that I don't really care much about the rest of it. And I found that in New York, a lot of people cared more about everything else. Punishingly, over and over, conversation after conversation, anxiety after anxiety. And as soon as I left there, I felt really free to just do this and have it be, this is Tuesday night, and Wednesday night's going to be something else, kind of like this, but not exactly this. So I'm happy. I think we're lucky. We take what we do everywhere. We speak a language, and we can do it anywhere. So we're very lucky in that way. And nobody buys CDs anymore.
My Wednesday is going to be exactly like this, which is odd, but can you speak a little to publishing and whether you were embraced or not embraced? And short stories are a different bag, I know.
They are, and I suppose every writer has a different experience of these things. But I was lucky. I was living in the West and writing short stories, and they started getting published in journals and then magazines, and I never actually had the hankering for life in New York. Partly, you really made me think of something. When I would go there, and of course I did when I had business there, but there was always a lot of talk about agents and editors and advances and a lot of, I guess, just the business that where I was living and the people that I you know, the writers that I knew and lived with, we really didn't talk about that. We really talked a lot about work, you know, stories, novels, that kind of thing. And I was pretty happy to be, I guess, you think a colonial rather than, you know, a city mouse, if that was the distinction to be made. And I don't actually think there was any advantage to be gained as a writer from living in that milieu. And talking that language all the time. Actually, I would have found it demoralizing. Oh my God, you got a bigger advance than I'll ever get, you know, whatever. And there's a line in T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets that I think every artist should have kind of tattooed on their eyelid, and it is this: for us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business. For us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business.
You have a brother who wrote, I remember reading his book Providence, and so
Great book.
Which, yeah, and clearly, you know, Providence is not in California or the West Coast.
Right.
Did he give you any? Was that any sort of influence, or did that make you come closer or further away from any terms of publishing?
My brother is 7.5 years older than I, and he was inspirational to me in the way that, I mean, he loved reading. It was his first passion in writing, and he had, when I was just a boy, he would have me write essays for him, seriously, and he educated me. I wasn't getting educated at school. I got a crash course from my brother, and so it wasn't that I wanted to write the work he was writing. He's very much his own writer, and he's older. We grew up in different parts of the country. He grew up with my father. I grew up with my mother, but that he had a set of values that were, for me, aspirational too, is to write, to know the literature of your language, to write as honestly, as truly, as well as you can, whatever that is. So in terms of setting that kind of a standard, yeah, he was a model for me. Tom mentioned Ray McCarver. He was a model for me in that way. Not that I wanted to write the stories he was writing, but just to write that well, to maybe have an effect on somebody else with something I wrote that his work was having on me, that kind of thing.
And you knew it was a possibility to be a writer at that point by seeing your brother and other people working. And so did you know that it was a possibility? These are all questions I have for my own children, so this is therapy time for me. I'm just pretending. So did you know that it was possible to make a living as an artist by seeing your father? And did you know the lyricism? And so Patrick, by the way, for people who don't know, is unbelievably schooled too. So again, like you're talking about like deeply schooled people, meaning they're not waking up in the morning and just willy-nillying it. They're, you know, I imagine every sentence, every solo, every note. They're aware of who played what when. And so you know that's a tough standard to get up and look at a blank page or a piece of brass with a little bit of reed and some open air. And so did it help or did it hinder? Or
well,
I become an artist.
When I was, most of the teachers that I was studying with, this would have been in New York in the 90s, who were older people who had been around for a while, and you know, they had seen careers go like this, very far up and very far down. And they were just uniformly discouraging about the career prospects.
Which is the best thing you could do to any artist, because that's how artists arrive.
And to the point of really, you know, the gatekeeping thing, they didn't want to compete with somebody for their own gig unless that person was 100% committed to really learning what the thing was about. And in New York, they were, you know, very, very blunt about that sort of thing. So from those people, I saw, you know, there was a lot of darkness about the frustrations, certainly economic and health frustrations that go along with that life when you're living for decades. But at the same time, I thought, well, they're still doing it. Despite all that, they're 78 years old, they're 84 years old. Roy Haynes is 97 years old.
Oh, right.
And they're still doing And there's been a lot of opportunities for them to do something else. And so I thought, there's some kind of gold in that hill. My own feelings about it, I pretty much just avoided thinking about careers at all, and just tried to practice and listen to records and keep the rent paid. And that really worked out well for me, because it kept me from some of the worst anxieties about what it was all supposed to mean. But I'll tell you a really quick one that I still think about. There's an interview with the great saxophone player Zoot Sims, who was kind of an accidental Zen master. I don't think he ever studied Zen, but he lived as a Zen person. And someone was saying, "Do you ever get tired of playing?" He said, "Well, here's my deal. Every New Year's Eve, I have some New Year's Eve gig, and my New Year's resolution every year is to put the horn in the closet until I feel like playing it." He said, "Every year I put it in the closet, and I wait until I feel like I need to play it." And he said, "Some years it's been 3 weeks, and some years it's been about 15 minutes. But every year, at some point, I take it out of the closet." And I thought, okay, I had the luxury of not having exquisite tastes, or I had roommates, and I was living cheap in New York. You could live cheap at one point, and I just said, okay, every day I'm going to get up and see what happens. I'm going to play the music I want to play, and listen to the records I want to listen to. And I won't lie, there was a lot of, I also bartended and managed a gluten-free bakery, which is the worst job any human being could ever have.
Teaching my son soprano sax has been the most fucking job ever.
Not even close to the allergy nuts, man. Not even close.
That's just being nice.
Anyway, I just hung in there, and I just found that despite the fact that it wasn't, at least for about 10 years, it wasn't turning into like, well, now I'm making money, now I'm comfortable, now I'm safe. It just kept being fun. It kept being interesting, and the more that it's like this beautiful painting. Every step you take closer to it, you see more of it. You see more detail in it. I just feel like if I can just keep paying rent and keep taking one step forward every month, that's it. What else is there?
So then again, back to location geography, maybe. God, I hate to give this up too. As a Miami Hurricane for 1 year and a college run dropout, I always thought I'd go to Cal. So, grudgingly, I'm going to have to ask, how does Stanford help you locate yourself then? Like in terms of, I don't know, like a day gig or money or the interest, of both of you. Because I know a good friend of ours, Jim Nadell, who started the first jazz program for colleges at Stanford. I've seen you down there play as well and work there. And having a steady gig helps with the rent, clearly. I don't know where you were in your career when that happened, but also helps to maybe center yourself in terms of the daily routine and the energy that's coming and going that you have to give to students and maybe receive too.
Yeah.
So, question to both of you about fucking Stanford.
No, I taught off and on at Stanford for 20 years, and
No offense.
no, and I loved it. I had wonderful students from just all over the place, and just I taught undergraduates, but I also taught in this extremely selective fellowship program. Tom Barbash was a fellow in the program there, and I just felt really lucky to be able to work with the students I did, and to be in a world where you're with other people who care about writing and books, to have that conversation all the time was a privilege. I have done other things in my life before I started teaching, and this almost seemed like I did retire a few years ago, so the pleasures did wear out. But there were, when I compared that to other jobs I had, my Lord, it was a gift to be in a world where people cared about things that I cared about and were happy to talk about them at a level that would have bored most people. And So, no, I have nothing but gratitude for my years there.
Yeah, I just have to agree with that. The stability helps, the environment helps. It is a job, and it's a different job. It's not, there's a lot of non-creative stuff that goes on. But at the end of the day, I mean, who gets to just paid to kind of talk about the things that they find really important? If you find yourself in that position, you're doing pretty well, right? I love
I'm not getting paid for this gift. I'm waiting.
But I love talking about jazz, and I love connecting with students, and I also, I don't know how you felt about this, but I mean, when you look at war and climate change and this, that, and the other thing, it's sometimes you at home with the blank piece of paper or running the scales or whatever starts to feel like, I mean, am I really doing my part here? And I think that education certainly is a way to kind of calm that voice a little bit, to say, well, look, the human soul also needs to continue, and somebody needs to help foster that and share the things that are invigorating in that, especially right now. And I mean, for the jazz world, it's a desperate situation for education. So anything I can do to just tell people, don't listen to that record, listen to this one. I think it's important.
Do you still have a radio show? You had a radio show for a while.
So I loved doing radio. I did KCSM for several years. I did this show where I would pick a kind of lesser known artist, the kind of person that musicians listen to but doesn't necessarily get the international tour. And I started the show because I thought, Hamir is like one of my partners in crime with this, that every conversation at some point, hey man, have you heard so-and-so, right? Have you heard this record? Have you heard this recite? That was what I called the show, Have You Heard? And I loved doing it. I found out that jazz radio was maybe even more frustrating and low-paying than any other part of the jazz world. And I had a child, and the teaching load had gone up, and it just got to the point where it wasn't sustainable. But I do love KCSM. There's some great people who work there still, and I do plan on getting back on the airwaves at some point when the school is fired. I'll probably go back there.
It's funny because the novel's always dying, jazz is always dying, and yet here we are. And unfortunately, I've been told we're running out of time on this show, which is always dying here. But I have to say, this has been fantastic, just to sit here with you two, to be here with all of you here at the Arion Press, where we're just keeping it all alive. And I feel really humbled to be out amongst amazing artists and readers and listeners and other artists. And please, let's do this again as soon as we can, and let's just keep this alive, because this is who we are, not only in San Francisco, but as a culture and as a species. That's what I got.
Thank you, Robert.